So let's get into it, talking about alternatives to the ER. And I guess a couple overarching statements that I'd like to make as we get into this. And then I want to start with a question. First is, like many of the things we discuss in this series, there's not a lot of rocket science, right? I guess that we're going to be sort of injecting into the conversation today. But the reason we talk about these topics is because when we're in the midst of a caregiving experience and you're just sort of up to your eyeballs in tasks to do, um, concern or worry, or just you're focused in the weeds of caregiving, it's hard to think clearly about anything really. So that's why we talk about these things, to hopefully either of course help people learn something new that maybe they didn't know or had lost sight of, but more often probably to remind people, right, that about X, Y, or Z. So that's what we're doing here today when we're talking about alternatives to the ER. And the second caveat is, um, going to the emergency room and calling 911 are always the right thing to do in in life-threatening emergencies, of course. So none of what we're talking about is meant to replace going to the ER, calling 911, of course, of course, of course. So keep that in mind. But with that, Sheila, that sort of brings up the question: is when you're caregiving, like, is everything an emergency, right? Like, and how do you sort of, how do you, how do you know? How do you, like, talk to me a little bit about your thought process there.
Well,
Um,
Matt, I really liked how you mentioned that when we're focused on caregiving or in any kind of stressful situation, it's really difficult to think of options or alternatives. We just sort of run into fight or flight mode. We're sort of just like, let's take care of this right away. And this is an opportunity to take a look at the situation and go, okay, so you're mentioning ER or 911. 911, obviously, life-threatening, right? Someone you think is having a heart attack or a stroke, or they're choking, or they're bleeding. I mean, these are kind of a little bit more obvious, like there is a life-threatening situation. I'd also like to think of, um, do you need them to go to the hospital right now? So do they need rapid, specialized treatment? Or, um, is it possible that they need to stay overnight or have surgery because of what's going on? That's an indication that you might want to call 911 or go to the ER too. It's a little bit different than all of the alternatives we're thinking of, which there's no way they're going to need surgery today, or at least we don't think so. Or it's been persisting for a while. So those two things, life threatening, and then is there some kind of specialized treatment that they might need? That's kind of how I differentiate those two things from all the other options that we're going to talk about.
yeah, I like how you put it. And yes, of course, there are times when it's obvious and just instinctual. Um, so thanks for sort of breaking it down that way. And because so for so long, right, there were only two-ish alternatives, right? Like,
Right.
um, call the doctor, get in the car to go to the emergency room, or, in the obvious situations like you're talking about, obviously, grabbing the phone and calling 911.
Sure.
What so and that sort of segues us, I think, into some of these options. Um, and the first one of the what we had on the top of the list was call the doctor, right?
Mhm.
And I guess what are your um not thoughts on that, but guidance, like that should be the first call, right? In a non-emergent situation, or is that not necessarily sort of your point of view?
No, I think that, if it's not an emergency and you're not going to the ER, you're not calling 911 and you're wondering about something. And if it's during the day, the doctor's office is open, and these are things like, boy, I've had this cough for a while. I wonder if my doctor can shed some light on it. Or like I've been noticing some weight loss lately. And you don't have to run somewhere and get that answer right then, but you might want to call the doctor and get some feedback. And they might, ask some other questions, whether it has to do with your medications or they'll probe a little bit deeper for you. So those kinds of things that if there's any sort of either behavioral change or mood change or symptoms that are coming up and you're kind of like, I just noticed. That's a great opportunity to call the doctor and find some information.
Yeah. You just struck a chord with, mood change or so I'm thinking again, my personal caregiving experience was a dementia sort of scenario. So I was forever like just thinking about is this a wow, this I hadn't seen this behavior from mom before as an example. Like, is this should I call the doctor? Right? Or like, so there was this constant in a dementia scenario that like I was in, it was you're constantly, or at least I was constantly sort of faced with that question, right? And we've, in our some of our focus conversations around dementia caregiving, we've talked about, this concept of like point in time versus a trend. Is it happening? But anyway, your mention of that sort of brought me right back. And it's okay. I guess one other thing I would just say on that, I battled personally just this in a lot of different, from a lot of different angles, this feeling of like almost being a burden
Oh
or not
gosh.
wanting to be a burden
Right.
as a caregiver. Um, and that included lots of different angles, like I said, but from everything from asking friends or family for help to calling the doctor and like, am I the person that's calling the doctor like every day or every week, and making a name for myself there? I guess the point I wanted to make is it doesn't really matter, right? If you're
Right.
unsure, call,
Yeah.
or if something's percolating, make the call and ask, right? Is that
Yeah, and this is for your peace of mind because often what they're going to do is probe and go down a series of questions, and they might guide you in a different direction. And they might say, let's set up an appointment. Or they might say, you know what? I need you to go to the ER. They might say that. So these questions are never bad to ask. And it's to give you a sense of, I don't have to make the decision on my own. I'm getting someone else's opinion on this. And it really does, even if they say, you know what, it's fine. I think it'll be fine. That you'll sleep better at night just knowing that.
Mhm.
So always a good idea.
Love it. Okay. All right. Let's talk about the next thing on the list. So, next alternative on the list, I should say, which is urgent care.
Mhm.
And these are I find interesting. I was just at one 3 weeks ago myself, but I don't remember them growing up. They're kind of I don't have the exact timeline, but they feel like a more recent sort of emergence, let's say, and they're kind of, for me up here in New Hampshire, I can think of three or four right off the top of my head in my surrounding area.
Yeah.
But when when should urgent care think sort of enter our thought process?
Well, there's a couple of things with urgent care. Typically, they're open for a limited amount of time, like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So they're available during the day or, for an extended period of time. So that's an interesting way to think about it. If something happens at night, you don't have that option. But one of the benefits of an urgent care is that um, they have a shorter wait time than
Mm,
typically than an ER. So that's a plus. And what they're there for is certainly not life-threatening. You're never going to go to an urgent care for life-threatening, but you've just sprained your ankle and you need some care, but it's not critical. Or you've got an extended cold or a flu, or um, you've just cut yourself in the kitchen and you need some stitches. You can go to an urgent care for that. You
mhm.
can go to an urgent care for a UTI. A lot of them have equipment set up. They could take samples in a laboratory and give you a quick medication for it. So they're set up to take care of a lot of the common issues that come up for people and to mitigate some of the symptoms and even possibly give you some prescription for some medications.
Okay. And in terms of how we pay for that care,
Mm,
they
you have to
accept
check.
insurance
Yeah.
and or pay out of pocket or
You would ask questions, I think, and everyone is a little bit different. Some of them are they'll say yes, we'll bill your insurance. Other people say you have to pay out of pocket for it. So it really does, I think, from area to area, region to region, it could be different. I don't know
Mhm,
what your experience was, but I've paid out of pocket
mhm.
for urgent cares that I've gone to.
Yeah, yeah, it depends on. So I guess that the lesson there is, or the takeaway lesson, it's sounding all fancy. The takeaway is just like you would in any other care setting, ask the question.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about something that I've never actually been in one, but I noticed one the other day when I was in my local Walmart. Um, but walk-in clinics, I guess they're called, right?
Yeah.
You know, the clinics that you find in sort of the big box retailers like a Walmart.
Yep.
I guess are those this, you know, they're clearly another alternative for the right situation, but are they are they the same as urgent cares, or like what are those good fits for? I guess is the
I think
question.
a little bit more common conditions. I think they're set up to give a vaccine, for instance. They actually sometimes have a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant who could write a prescription for you right there, then and there. But they're not going to have diagnostic, laboratory setup for you. And you'll find them in things like Target or Walmart, or I think like Kroger is a big grocery chain. And they also have some walk-in clinics, but also your pharmacies. I know Walgreens and Rite Aid and CVS have these little, and they all have names like the Ready Clinic or the Minute Clinic.
Hmm.
And so they're set up to have someone there. Sometimes it's a nurse if they're only doing vaccines, but they're set up to be kind of a little mini um, station where you can go in and ask questions or have some basic care.
Okay, okay, that's helpful. And so, just a reminder to the audience, if there are questions or uh, observations that you've had, please do share them in the chat or the QA icons down in the bottom of the console. So the other so we, ask and I shall receive. There is
That's good.
uh, a question here or a chat. Okay, so I'm just going to read this question. Do you have suggestions on how to get a person up and down the stairs to their appointments when they are more immobilized?
Wow. Yeah.
Um, uh, great, great question to the question asker. Sheila, how would you respond to that? And then I'll go.
Yeah, I would think that first and foremost, you never want to try something on your own that you haven't been instructed on how to do it. You certainly don't want yourself falling down the stairs or hurting your back as you're caring for someone. And what I would recommend is you could talk to your doctor about possibly getting a an order for physical therapy or occupational therapy. And what they can do is train you and show you how to get someone or move someone, and there are services that will, um, you can get a transportation service that will assist you with that, and they actually do it for you. But I would say the first step, like sort of down and dirty and simple, is to talk to your doctor, get their opinion, and maybe have a therapist help you with that.
Hmm. Agreed. And we do, not in lieu of what you're suggesting, Sheila, but we will soon. We have tons and tons and tons of resources in the Carallel app. But we are working on a series of training type videos right now, actually, that will be published shortly in the next few weeks um, on these types of topics where we have a therapist on video sort of explaining some of these things. So, and of course, just I guess one last point to the question asker. Um, this is something that our care advocates like Sheila would happily talk through with you, right, to make a game plan for this. this type of question, because it's a real, it's an important question, a real question, but you know, and absolutely square to like, if there are mobility challenges, like, you know, how do we not let that inhibit somebody seeing the doctor and getting to appointments
That's
and these
right.
types of things? So really glad you asked. Um,
Yeah.
oh, I thought I saw another one, but false alarm. Okay, so the other one other alternative I wanted to talk about are and lesser known, certainly to me, I guess, but this concept of nurse advice lines, right?
Mm-hmm.
So uh, some health plans, a fair amount of health plans, I feel like, or certainly the ones we work with, they have this nurse advice line, right? Staffed by registered nurses, you know, credentialed professionals who are there to answer, oftentimes 24/7, right?
Yeah.
Their questions, and and these are support lines provided um, by health insurance companies, for instance. But can you talk a little bit about that as an option in a case where somebody has concern about
Yeah.
something going on?
I think the nice thing about this is it's sort of think of it as a reassurance again. So the doctor's office is closed. It's not an emergency where you have to run off, but there's something that's bothering you. And it's a lot of these things happen at 10 or 11 at night, right? So it's someone to talk to who can talk to you about the medications you're on and possible side effects. They could talk to you about any health concern that you have, and just
Mhm.
really anything that's like, I'm wondering about this, or I'm noticing this, what should I do? It's a guidance, and they might even say, it doesn't sound like it's something I can handle. Why don't you? And then they'll guide you in a different direction, either make an appointment or go to the hospital. I mean, it really could be that, but you're
Mhm.
getting this professional advice and once again, peace of mind.
Peace of mind. Yeah, and that's no small thing, by the way, in this,
Yeah.
right? Obviously, first and foremost is the care and well-being and safety of the person that we're caring for, of course, our own sort of personal safety and well-being, of course, but peace of mind is a sneaky big part of all of this for the caregiver, right? Like the toll, the cumulative weight of all that we carry as caregivers. Um, it's always sort of growing, and then it at least for me anyway, it had a way of spiking anytime there was some sort of acute issue going on where I had to, you know, with mom, where I had to call, right? So the peace of
Yeah.
mind, all that to say that, you know, you've mentioned peace of mind a couple of times, and it's not just a sort of throwaway phrase or
Mhm.
word here. It's meaningful and very, very important um, for us as caregivers, right? Because well, for lots of different reasons, but so I just wanted to add that. Um, Now, Sheila, two other things. I'm just watching the time. So
Mm.
I guess I want to just sort of round this out by um, sort of coming back to why, when appropriate, it may make sense to you know, to go to pursue one of these options as opposed to going straight to the emergency room, right? So um, you know, it comes down to, so I'm thinking of like less time potentially than it would take for you to wait at the ER, um, depending on what sort of insurance you have and all of that sort of stuff. Less out of pocket cost, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, Sort of quality of life for your loved one in that moment, in that period of time, like
Yeah.
um, all of that. So, what are your thoughts there? You know, like
Well, for
why are we
sure.
talking about alternatives to the
Well,
ER?
and I think that it's all those things. And it's sort of I hear all the time. Well, we went to the ER and we had to spend the night in the ER because it took so long. And if I had thought of it through, he didn't really need to be at the ER. So once again, it gets to that point and it's scary, right? You're nervous, something's come up and you made this decision, right? but it is something that usually takes a long time. They will triage, meaning that they're going to take care of the people who are critical first, and you have to keep in mind that you may be spending a lot of time there. So it's a moment to go, okay, is this life-threatening? Are there any alternatives? Can I call that nurse line and get her opinion? Or is there any other option that I could, before I make that jump to the ER or to call 911, can I, get some more feedback from someone? Because it takes a lot out of the caregiver and your loved one to sit in a
Mhm.
ER waiting room. It
Yeah.
really does.
Yeah. Not to mention, or not to say that all the other alternatives we've sort of touched on here would be lightning fast every time. That's, wish that
Right.
were the case, but that's probably not the case. But it's, comparison, like, is it, 90 minutes or 2 hours versus six,
Right.
something like that, right? So, um, okay. And another question came in, Sheila, that I'll read and I'm gonna just get your thoughts.
Okay.
So I have a DCNR order, and should I
Mhm.
call 911 if my wife is having seizure after seizure?
Mhm. Yeah, the boy, that's scary. And so this is a do not resuscitate order, which is an order that a doctor writes. It's like a prescription. I would first talk to your doctor and ask what they think in that moment. But know that if you have a DNR and you have the documentation and you have it like on your refrigerator, we often say somewhere like that. If you do call 911 and the paramedics show up, you show them that, and that is a doctor's order. But I would absolutely verify this with your doctor first and get their opinion on it. It's got to be very scary to be in that situation and having someone have a seizure. And if they say no, it's not appropriate, then say, well, what is? What do I do then? Um,
Mhm.
because it's got to be really tough to be by yourself and have that happen.
Agreed. Agreed. And thank you for asking. Again, another question that could be well suited for a one-on-one conversation with uh, one of our care advocates as well. But in answering that question, Sheila, you brought up one other thing that I want to talk about, which is the communication in these moments. Okay. So,
Mhm.
and sort of adjacent around these moments, right? So I guess what are some tips, like, main takeaway is, when you're just asking or answering the previous question, and um, you provided perspective, but also said definitely confirm this with your doctor, and if they say it's not appropriate, ask what is. I love that question.
Mhm.
But so asking the question, right? If you don't have ultimate clarity on what steps you can take if this happens, ask the questions until you get it, right? But are there any other
Right.
communication tips that you'd offer?
I would just say in general, Matt, and I've said this so many times, like in our support groups and as we're working with people individually, never be afraid to ask the question. Don't assume that your doctor is going to lay it all out and sort of set the tone for the question. Because I think doctors are waiting for patients to ask questions, and patients are waiting to be, prompted by the doctor. And so no communication happens. I really encourage any question you have, ask and keep asking, and then say, what does that mean? And how would that work? And who do I call? Whatever it is. Um, and one thing we didn't mention, Matt, which actually ties back to that first question about the having a problem with an immobile care
Mhm,
recipient or loved
mhm.
one, is telehealth. They could check into their doctor's office
Right,
to see if it's a possibility to do telehealth instead of taking them out of your place to get to an appointment.
right. I love that. And we had that on the list. We skipped right over it. So,
Yeah, I know, but
um,
the question triggered it, so it's great.
yeah, yeah. Um, and telehealth could be a great option for, of course, if there are mobility concerns or challenges, is the question in the question asker's situation. But in general, like,
Mhm.
it could be a, a helpful option to just, oftentimes, regardless of what sort of specific mobility challenges there are, there can be lots of challenges to getting out of the house and
Yeah.
getting into the appointment. So, um, well, time flies when we're having fun. Sheila, any final thoughts for the audience?
I think trust your gut. I think if you're really worried and something's, concerning you, and it's certainly if it's life-threatening, call 911. Just go ahead and do it. Otherwise, now you know you have options and there are different ways to look at it. There are people to call in the middle of the night or during the day to get second opinions. And you're all doing an amazing job.
Yes. Okay. You just stole my thunder there with that last bit because that was going to be my parting thought. Thanks, Sheila. Thanks
Thank
everyone for
you.
being here. We'll see you soon.